When I was a wee ghouling, I first got into Warhammer after spotting some cool miniatures and wandering into the local Games Workshop store. I got the usual introduction from the store worker, where they showed me the ropes of 40k. While I thought the blue Space Marines I borrowed were cool, something else had caught my eye. Something that was also blue, but wore no armour except for its scaly hide, had teeth that could tear through steel, and a tail that could crush a man's head. The Aztec lizard crossovers were my main reason for becoming invested in Warhammer, and I read their codex cover to cover multiple times when I was first getting into the hobby. Among my brilliant, scaly boys are a number of intriguing figures, from the Warhammer Doom guy, Oxyotl, to the mummified Toad Lord Kroq. But I think if we're going to ease ourselves into the lizards, there may be none better than Kroq Gar to give us that introduction into arguably the most badass Warhammer fantasy race. To start though, it's probably best to give you a bit of background into the ancient history of the Lizardmen. Like 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, at least in the original lore, was created by the Old Ones, which are said to be mysterious, reptilian entities who had a very strong connection to the Warp. Once, it seemed Games Workshop's plan was to have the Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k universe be somewhat connected, as proven by the Old Ones existing in both settings. Obviously, these plans have been thrown out since, but my point is that the Old Ones were around in Fantasy too, and like in 40k, they also disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The first race they created was the Lizardmen, and the lizards were made in the Old Ones' own image, unlike the humans, elves, and other races they developed. Also, there was an extremely close connection between the Old Ones and their lizardy boys. Shortly after the Old Ones abandoned the Old World, Warhammer Fantasy was beset upon by forces of chaos. As the elves and humans were still in their infancy at this point, what became known as the Great Catastrophe was up to the Lizardmen to deal with. They had to withstand tides of millions, perhaps even billions of demons, and ensure they weren't wiped out in the process. Here enters Kroq Gar. Well, more accurately, he entered the world a few centuries back, in a great spawning of Xotl. You see, Lizardmen aren't born into the world naturally, and instead are spawned into great spawning pools underneath their temple cities. This makes the Lizardmen a uniquely doomed race, in a way, as they are entirely reliant on their temple cities, not only as their homes, but as their means to produce new Lizardmen as well. Kroq Gar was spawned under the temple city of Xotl, also known as the City of Destiny, along with a few other Saurus who were each marked for greatness. Kroq Gar's spawning coincided with the birth of a brood of mighty Carnosaurs as well, some of the strongest beasts in Lustria. Kroq Gar took the largest and most ferocious beast, called Grimlock, as his own. As a Saurus warrior, Kroq Gar was tasked with defending the city of Xotl and the race of the Lizardmen as a whole. His greatest test came within the first few centuries of his life, when the Great Catastrophe began, and chaos swarmed over the world in unfathomable numbers. Kroq Gar rode out on Grimlock to lead the defence of Xotl alongside of his brothers during this time. The Lizardmen proved to be unstoppable on the field of battle, wiping out entire armies of demons by leading them into ambushes in the great jungles of Lustria and sending them screaming back to the realms of chaos. However, no matter how many they cut down, it seemed millions more were always ready to take the demons' place and take advantage of the waning powers of the Slann within Xotl. In a great surge of magical power, the demons saw a chance and managed to teleport themselves within the walls of the city. Before Kroq Gar could ride home, the Slann and Lizardmen within Xotl had all been slaughtered and the city had been left in ruins. Even with Xotl burning behind him, Kroq Gar did not stop his fight. He fled the city, protected by the last blessings of the Slann before they passed, and struck out into the jungle with the remainder of his army. While the city of Xotl had fallen, Kroq Gar didn't seek to join the rest of the Lizardmen in another temple city, nor did he flee Lustria in the hopes of finding somewhere else to call home. Kroq Gar and his men had accepted their deaths the moment they stepped onto the battlefield, so they made the jungles around Xotl a death trap for wandering demon hosts, slaying thousands even though their numbers reached just over 100. One by one though, the great army of Kroq Gar was brought low. They kept up their fight for centuries, sending countless enemies of the Old Ones back into the Great Void, but it was not enough to stop the overwhelming force of chaos. Only the elves, with their great ritual, managed to stop the catastrophe. By that point, only Kroq Gar and Grimlock remained of the last defenders of Xotl. Following the world returning to some form of stability, Lord Mazda Mundi, who had taken de facto leadership of the Lizardmen, ordered Kroq Gar to return to Hexoatl and take control of the remainder of the Saurus armies. he was given the Hand of the Gods, which allowed him to essentially blast huge lasers at his foes. From then on, Kroq Gar led his new hosts to every corner of the world, fighting Chaos, Orcs, Skaven, and any other threat to the great plan of the Old Ones. Kroq Gar, in the thousands of years he's spent in Warhammer Fantasy setting, has accumulated quite the kill count. Since the rise of Sotek, the serpent god of the lizard men that emerged when great Skaven hordes threatened the temple cities and the plagues brought by the rats slew many before battle could even begin, Kroq Gar is said to have claimed the heads of over 1,000 Skaven warlords. During the Shrunken Head War, where savage orc warbands threatened the jungles of Lustria and ran over them in great numbers, Kroq Gar is again credited with killing all 6 of the tribe's war bosses. He's even managed to ground and destroy a Black Ark. When Dark Elf raiders made their way to Lustria on the Umbral Tide, Kroq Gar led his army out of the jungles and defeated them with ease, bringing their great settlement to ground before destroying it. More recently, Kroq Gar was given the task of cleansing Albion of Warmbloods by Lord Mazdamundi. Once the essential genocide had been done, the construction of a new temple city was ordered, as Mazdamundi altered the climate of the island to allow jungles to grow and the new city of Konkata to be born within them. Kroq Gar's holiday to Britain was short-lived, as before long a Chaos Warband leader known as Vashnar the Tormentor brought his host down on the city of Hexuatl. Vashnar wished to sacrifice Aslan's heart to his patron god, and so brought his great band of marauders to Hexuatl, assisted by a troop of Dark Elf mercenaries. Tic-Tac-Toe managed to spot the approaching army, but didn't have the defences to hold for long. After a great toll was exacted on the defenders, a combined effort from both Mazdamundi and Kroq Gar managed to bring the Chaos War leader low. In a duel between himself and Vashnar, Kroq Gar bit the head off the Chaos Warband leader to display it proudly on his saddle. Alongside his teeth that can rip the heads from his foes and claws that can even slice through steel, Kroq Gar does equip himself with some sweet war gear. I've already mentioned the Hand of the Gods, which was a large metal gauntlet that allowed Kroq Gar to be as deadly at range as he was in melee due to its ability to shoot off white-hot lasers. As well as the Hand of the Gods, Kroq Gar is also equipped with his revered spear of Tlanxla, which is said to be not only a weapon that I've horribly mispronounced, but a spear wielded by the warlike Old One Tlanxla, who rode a chariot high above the sky. As well as just being able to slash and stab through its enemies, the revered spear also hums with a strong energy that can cause those who are hit by it to see visions of their doom. So, even if you're not killed outright by a swing of Kroq Gar's spear, you won't have any will left to fight and will essentially just be left depressed. Bit of a lose-lose situation, really. Like the rest of the Lizardmen, at the end of the Old World, Kroq Gar found himself defending the temple cities from Clan Pestilence and a looming moon about to crash into the world. While he cut down as many Skaven as he could see, it was not enough to stop the Vermintide, and so it was all Kroq Gar could do to see his people off as they sought to flee the Old World and find a new home among the stars. Along with his Saurus armies, he gave the Slann as much time as they needed to enact the great ritual that would see the Lizardmen become the Seraphon. However, the toll for that ritual was high, and it ended up seeing Grimlock killed by Lord Skrolk of Clan Pestilence. Without a moment to mourn his oldest and dearest friend, Kroq Gar instead strode up to the disgusting rat and tore him apart with tooth and claw. Despite being easily beaten by Kroq Gar, the old Saurus couldn't enact full revenge upon the rat as he was scurried away by the Vermin Lord Vermilanx. Initially, it was believed that after defeating Skrolk and giving the Lizardmen enough time to escape, Kroq Gar didn't make it on one of the Slann's floating temples, but that has since been disproven. Even without Grimlock, one of the oldest creatures in existence wasn't going down easy, and it is mostly believed he did make his way into the mortal realms. Where he is in those realms is somewhat disputed. There are those who believe he simply hasn't been given any spotlight yet due to Games Workshop not having any idea for what he can do in the mortal realms, and while these rumours are likely to hold some weight, there's also another idea, one that has Kroq Gar not necessarily just survive the end times, but ascend during it. Bear with me here. His last moments on the Old World are spent as the Hand of the Gods flashes incredibly brightly, and then we don't see anything else of him. It is believed he survived, but what if there was another fate for Kroq Gar? There is the possibility that Kroq Gar did not leave the Old World at all, but instead became the being that collected its pieces, named it Malus, and brought it forth into the mortal realms. That's right, there's a conspiracy theory out there that has Kroq Gar as Dracothian. While this does explain Dracothian's friendliness with the Seraphon, I don't think the theory does hold that much weight, as it is a bit crazy, and I don't think Games Workshop would put the weight of Dracothian onto Kroq Gar's shoulders. I think at the minute it's more likely that Games Workshop is just currently deciding whether to keep him alive or have him perish with Grimlock in the lore. That about does it for Kroq Gar. He doesn't have much of a distinct personality, but for sheer badassery and weight of action in the Warhammer world, it's hard to find characters who genuinely surpass him. Sometimes, in Warhammer especially, all you need to do is be good at killing to have a fanbase. And this bulky blue lizard certainly won over my heart with his ability to point out the biggest, baddest thing on the battlefield and make it dead. Who's your favourite Warhammer character? Until we meet again, let me know who that is, and if I should cover them next. Also, hit all the usual buttons, and as soon as you've done that, I suppose it's time for us to say goodbye. See you next time, chaps.